So today I want to talk about this concept of latent talent. This is an untapped portion of our workforce that could work, but for whatever reason is precluded from being in the labor force or working today. And so this is really going to be driven by a couple of main factors right now. And so in Charlotte, we've seen a projected increase of job postings in 2021 over 2020 levels of about 10%. So we're seeing continuing rate of employers looking to hire. Yet we're still seeing employment about 2% lower than where it was pre-pandemic. So because of this, we're hearing from a lot of employers about a talent shortage. We're looking to hire, but we can't find anyone. And so given that talent shortage, I think now is an especially great time to talk about this concept of latent talent. And so a lot of what we'll be talking about today comes from some recent research out of Harvard and Accenture, and really is just diving in detail into this report that they recently released. So today we're going to talk about three main topics. What is latent talent? What are the key drivers keeping these individuals out of the workforce? And then what are some solutions? And so again, let's just start with the basic definition. What is latent talent? And so again, this research defined three main categories of latent talent. Those that are missing hours, those that are missing from work, so long-term unemployed individuals, and then those that are missing from the workforce. So these are individuals that are not currently looking for work, but could be convinced to take a job if the circumstances were right. And so what is the scope of this? So this analysis concluded that there are about 27 million latent workers in the US workforce. So again, it represents a large portion of potential talent in our workforce. And out of that, the biggest bucket were those that were missing hours. So those are individuals that are working currently, but they're maybe in a part-time role, but they'd love to be working in a full-time role. And out of those that are missing hours, I did want to point out that 34% of them were doing this for economic reasons. So maybe that's due to facing a benefits cliff. If they make more money, they actually lose certain benefits and they're worse off economically. So there is a portion of those that are missing hours that are doing so for an economic reason. Again, about 4% missing from work, so we're talking about the long-term unemployed populations. And then 37% missing from the workforce. So those that, again, 58% of these people want to work, it's just for whatever reason, they're not looking for work, they've become discouraged, but if the circumstances were right, they would take a job. And so a lot of this work in this article really talked about the importance of understanding the unique characteristics of these latent workers in order to serve them better. And so with that in mind, I wanted to talk about the work we did last year to identify 6 different job seeker personas to, again, understand what are these unique considerations that different people experience that affects their job seeker journey. And so we came up with 6 different personas to better serve individuals in our community: the experienced adult, the underemployed adult, the young adult, an adult coping with chronic challenges, and then a recently incarcerated adult. And then lastly, a retiree returning to the workforce. And so what we know is that at the bottom, you'll see some of the different barriers and challenges that these individuals will face as they're going through this job seeker journey. And what we know is this journey is the same for everyone. Everyone goes through the same process, but we experience it very differently based on our persona and our background. And so certain individuals, those may be coping with chronic challenges, may not have access to transportation or may have a large gap in their resume history that makes it difficult for them to pursue traditional employment opportunities. So this journey is going to be experienced very differently based on those characteristics. And so really getting access to this latent talent pool requires us to be intentional about which persona are we serving and how do we come in and support them and meet their needs and meet them where they are. And so with that in mind, how do we do that? We want to talk about what are those key drivers keeping this talent latent, keeping it from being in the workforce today. And so the 3 main factors that the report outlined that are really keeping a lot of these individuals out of the workforce today are a widening training gap. And so what we're talking about there is as technology has become more prevalent in occupations, those individuals that don't have technical skills that were in an occupation that, say, 10, 20 years ago didn't require any technical aptitude, now find themselves in a position where they have to train and upskill to retain that position or they get pushed out. Another issue that was prevalent in this report was the issue with applicant tracking systems. So these ATS systems, they were finding that they were accidentally filtering out qualified candidates because of the logic in the system. And then the last one is a lot of companies are viewing accessing this latent talent population through a corporate social responsibility arm. So through their CSR arm, rather than looking at the business case and realizing that there is a return on investment to be realized here, and that there's a real benefit to targeting this population and working to bring them into the workforce. And so the first thing that I really wanted to talk about here is that 84% of latent talent found the application process too difficult. And so again, when we talk about those that are missing from the workforce, that was one of those key factors that people were saying that caused them to stop looking for work, was the application process was just too difficult. And so one of the recommendations in the report was to look at your application process for employers, look at it through a customer experience mindset, look at the user interface, user experience, and really streamline that. Make sure it's an enjoyable experience. You're asking the questions that you need to ask, but you're not asking too many. It doesn't take an hour and a half to complete an application. So that was a main barrier for individuals to continue or looking for work. And if you think about that, if you extrapolate that to, well, what does that look like for a job seeker? So a job seeker isn't just applying to your one position. And if we look at how many applications do these latent talent individuals have to submit before they get a single job offer or two job offers, what we have on the screen here is a different characteristics for job seekers, latent talent, and about how many applications they had to submit to get one or two offers. And so down at the bottom of the screen, you can see long-term unemployed individuals had to submit 44 applications just to get over one job offer. And up at the top of the screen, that's still those without any relevant work experience. So thinking about entry-level positions, you're still having to submit 20 applications to get about two offers. So you're seeing that if you extrapolate that out, it's not just your one application that they're having to go through. They're having to go through 20 or 40 applications just to get a job offer. And so that's discouraging a lot of individuals from continuing to participate in the workforce today. Another thing that was important and that was pointed out in this report was that a lot of the middle skill latent talent, their primary job search was through a career center. So like our NC Works career centers. 35% of them were saying that's our primary job search, a point of contact. Yet only 26% of employers prioritize at career centers. So if you want to access this latent talent population, again, connecting with us, connecting with the career center is a great place to start to really get access to this latent talent pool. And to just highlight again, what were some of those common barriers that individuals, this latent talent population, was experiencing that were keeping them out of the workforce? So the top one was, again, years of experience. And we talked about this. If you're looking at an entry-level position, you're having to submit 20 applications just to get a job offer. And if you look at those entry-level positions, a lot of times they will still even require 5 to 10 years of experience. And so that creates an issue where if you don't have that experience, how do you even get started? It's a chicken and the egg scenario. And then another issue is, again, employment gap. So thinking about our long-term unemployed population, if individuals, for whatever reason, due to family care or other issues, had to take off of work for a substantial portion of the pandemic, you're looking at 6 months to a year of an employment gap. And how do you explain that? How do you go and get yourself back in the workforce given that employment gap? And then the last two really relate to that training gap that we talked about. So academic performance is think about that as level of academic attainment. So maybe you didn't finish high school, or maybe you started college but you left before you got your degree. And then again, the professional certification. So if your job now requires you to have a specific certification in order to perform it, and you don't have that certification, so you may have the skills but you don't have the certificate to prove that you have those skills, and you're not qualified for the role. And so really what I want to end on is, what are some potential solutions? How do we get this latent talent into the workforce, and how do we support them? And so let me start with what workers are doing on their own, how they're overcoming these challenges on their own. And really what they talked about from this survey was three main things that latent talent is working on. They're developing their digital skills. So again, we talked about that skills gap. So as we become a more digital economy, they're really forced to develop these skills. So that's one thing they're working on. Another thing is accessing their transferable skills. So if they maybe worked in hospitality before the pandemic hit, and now they're having to shift industries, realizing that a lot of the skills they have are still transferable to other industries. And we have a video series on that as well on our channel, so I'd encourage you to check that out. And then lastly, they're developing their soft skills. So understanding just professionalism in a workplace setting and how they have to operate in a workplace. And again, we have our Working Smart curriculum with our career centers to help with all of these things as well. And so then what I want to talk about is what were some of the recommendations from the report for employers? What can employers do in order to better access this potential pool of workers, given that they're facing a talent shortage? And so one of the top recommendations was to change job descriptions. A lot of times when job descriptions are being created, we don't start from scratch. We take an old draft of a job description and add on to it and tweak it here and there. And given that process, we're left with something that isn't just what we need, but has a bunch of nice to haves that may show up as requirements. And so one of the recommendations was to start from scratch when creating a job description and to make sure that you limit it to only what's required for that position. And so Latent Talent said what would be really helpful, the top thing for them with a job description, is aligning your job titles to the task. So when you do a search for a job, based on the job title alone, they can really get a good idea of what the role is going to entail. And then nextly, limiting the skills requirements to the essentials. So we're not asking for skills that aren't absolutely essential. Even something, again, as minor as maybe an Excel skill, if it's not required, that could be a significant barrier for certain segments of the population. And then again, limiting the use of jargon. We've used a bit of jargon here today. So like CSR, or corporate social responsibility, people may not know what that means if they're coming from a different industry. So limiting the use of that jargon is helpful. And then limiting the academic requirements again to the essentials. We talked about where someone may have gone to college but not completed college. And is that an actual requirement for this role? And so the other thing that I wanted to talk about is we talked about this idea of viewing latent workers as the business case to be made for engaging this population and not looking at it through the corporate social responsibility lens. And so there was a survey from employers here that talked about, do latent workers perform better than their counterparts? And so here what you see is you've got 3 bars on the screen, and what that represents is the green bar is those companies that hire many latent workers. So they have the support structures in place for onboarding to bring them on. And you can see across the board, from attitude and work ethic to innovation to attendance to quality of work, those companies that hire many latent workers said they perform better. And you can see those companies that don't hire very many latent workers said they didn't perform better. About only 30% felt they performed better. And then those companies that only hired a few were right about in the middle there, where they felt they performed about on the same as their peers. So what this is really telling us is, if you're a company that really embraces this, you've got access to a talent pool that your competitors don't have access to, and this talent pool performs better, because a lot of this is going to be about the support structures that you have in place as an organization to make sure that they feel supported when they're coming on board, that they've got the proper resources and they feel supported, so they know that you're there to help them through whatever unique challenges they have. And what you get in return is a higher performing employee. And so lastly, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about this concept of the applicant tracking system. And so this was one thing that the report highlighted, which is, this is a breakdown, this is a graph of really how, on the center, you're talking about how companies believe the ATS is currently working, where you have an inclusive job posting, we have blind resume selection, we have a standardized onboarding process, and fair evaluation. But what's actually happening in this automated hiring loop, again, there's no human involvement here, is that this algorithmically driven advertisement, there's potential for discrimination via exclusion of target audiences. And then that automated evaluation is going to have some more potential for discrimination given criteria which are proxy variables. So for example, degree attainment is a proxy variable for race at sometimes, given just the historical inequity. And then the automated onboarding, again, we talked about the importance of having support resources in place, so that potential for inadvertent discrimination through the one-size-fits-all approach. And then again, the algorithmically driven resume sorting has some potential for discrimination there with the selection criteria. So again, these ATS systems can exclude a lot of these latent workers from even getting to that interview stage. And so when we talk about the number of applications a candidate has to submit in order to get 1 or 2 offers, that's a key driver, is they're not even getting to that interview stage. They're getting filtered out very early on. And so then again, lastly, just some more solutions for employers that I wanted to end on is targeting segments of latent talent. And so we talked about those 6 different personas that we serve. And one thing to think about is it doesn't mean you have to target all 6 personas. It's certain personas are a better fit for certain industries or certain companies. And so by targeting a specific persona, you can really hone in on making sure we have the support structures in place for their unique needs, whether that's childcare, flexible hours, whatever that may be. Finding those personas that fit your company's environment and targeting them to make sure that you have the support structures in place. Another key thing is just having senior leaders as champions of this concept so that employees, again, feel supported, hiring managers know that this is important, and then when they come on board, again, they have the support structure in place to be successful. And then lastly, again, I would just encourage you to connect with Charlotte Works, to connect with us and our career centers. We talked about the fact that a large number of these latent workers use the career center as their primary job search point of contact, and yet the same number of employers aren't prioritizing career centers. So again, lastly, I would just encourage you to connect with us if you want to talk more about how we can help you target certain personas or help you get connected with talent. And so again, that's all I have for you today, but I hope you enjoyed this short video on latent talent.